We're here to talk about how a mythological figure that liked to murder people in their own beds can help you be a better person, or at least a less stupid one. To do this, we're going to refer to a book I've talked about many times, The Bed of Procrustes by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, in which he refers to this mythological story about a man nicknamed Procrustes that liked to host guests but had a rather strange method of hospitality in which he would first wine and dine you, and then when he would take you to your room to sleep, depending on if you were too tall or too short for the bed he assigned you to, he would lop off your limbs until you fit or stretch you. So Procrustes has become a useful metaphor, this notion of a Procrustean bed, and it applies all over the place. Mostly on this channel we focus on psychiatry as a kind of Procrustean bed that attempts to reduce people to these mental boxes they call mental illnesses, which strips away all the context, history that may be relevant to how someone is actually feeling. So we're going to go through some of these aphorisms, not all of them, and it's not to say that I'm here to explain them. Taleb would discourage that. Really, we're just going to do some free association on some of these aphorisms that hopefully elaborate some of the ideas and maybe inspires you to read the book for yourself. The person you are most afraid to contradict is yourself. This is something I see in therapy all the time. And my understanding or my view on this is that the reason for that is because so much of what we believe is connected to how we think about ourselves, our identity. And if you contradict a belief or you threaten a certain belief that informs your worldview, that connects with how you see yourself, that can be highly destabilizing and a threat to your sense of self. So consciously or unconsciously, we can fight very hard to defend beliefs that thus far have cultivated or safeguarded a particular identity that at least part of us desires to maintain. In a way, you're threatening someone's existence. And this is why I've spoken previously about this distinction between content and relationship aspects of communication. Because so many debates you see online or in person, they're fixated, they're stuck on this content level, just talking back and forth about content, but they're missing the higher order conversation that is occurring, that communicates things about how they relate to one another, the relationship that they have together. And so if you don't get to that level, you can just end up spinning your wheels and never really get to the root of why there is this disagreement in the first place that has provoked this conflict. Pharmaceutical companies are better at inventing diseases that match existing drugs rather than inventing drugs to match existing diseases. This is psychiatry in a nutshell. Basically, all of the drugs that are prescribed in the name of psychiatry, they're not addressing or curative in the sort of standard understanding of what a medicine is, that it is somehow removing or correcting a pathology within the body. That's not what is happening with these drugs. Talked about this myth of the chemical imbalance that was promoted for decades, still is in some circles, by psychiatry. And how that was the narrative that was used to sell people on these drugs like SSRIs, but it's a myth. And this is not what's going on. And any benefit that is derived from these drugs is not due to it having rebalanced some ostensible imbalance in the brain, but rather either because of the placebo effect, expecting to feel better by taking what is perceived to be a medicine, or because it potentially narrows the field of experience, the range of experience one feels. Often people report a kind of numbness, being hollowed out when they're on these drugs. And so if you're in a real extreme negative emotional state that you don't like, then narrowing that range perhaps for you is preferable. How sustainable that is over the long run is perhaps a topic for another day. But again, it's not curing a disease. There's really no distinction between a drug like lithium or these SSRIs and something like alcohol, in that they're all just a means of modifying your mood. And no one would claim that alcohol is a medicine. But some people feel better when they drink it, just as some people feel better when they take a psych drug. In nature, we never repeat the same motion. In captivity, office, gym, commute, sports, life is just repetitive stress injury. No randomness. When I read this, I'm reminded of the period where I first started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And before that, I was mainly just cycling and doing gym, lifting weights and some cardio. And Taleb's right. That first week I did Jiu-Jitsu, I've never felt as sore, perhaps ever in my life, after that first week. The muscles that are called to action when you're engaged in this full body attempt to defend yourself, that is free of any sort of machinery or, again, these repetitive artificial movements what we've created in gyms. They're just incomparable. If you haven't experienced that and you confine yourself to this repetitive stuff, then you may be surprised at how you feel after you engage in a more organic form of exercise. Don't talk about progress in terms of longevity, safety, or comfort before comparing zoo animals to those in the wilderness. Now, obviously, I can't help but be reminded of the human zoo when I read this one, which I made a video on. You can have a look at. Yeah, that safety and comfort has a cost, although it may appear to be a useful part of life. It can be a kind of quicksand that softens you, dilutes your humanity in a way. So we've got to be careful how we balance these things. Procrastination is the soul rebelling against entrapment. In short, to sum up the video I made on that topic, if practical solutions don't cure you of this procrastination, perhaps there's something subconscious going on that is preventing you from doing the thing you claim you want to do. And perhaps it's worth asking whether you actually do want to do it, or whether there's a part of you that is hostile to what you believe you should be doing. Maybe there's an argument to be made that you shouldn't actually do it. You'd be better off for not doing it. When we want to do something while unconsciously certain to fail, we seek advice so we can blame someone else for the failure. This is just one of many reasons for why, as I've said many times, us therapists don't give advice. It doesn't benefit us, and it often, not always, doesn't benefit you either. And in this case, Yeah, if there's a subconscious drive to fail, then soliciting advice from someone else and then failing is a means of redirecting the blame. But even outside of that, advice is a dangerous game. You're framing things in such a way as to imply that you as the therapist are some smart, wise oracle, and that you as the client just need to comply and do what I or the therapist says. But the danger in that is that it creates a dependency, prevents you from cultivating your own autonomy and belief in your own capacity for self-determination. It is harder to say no when you really mean it than when you don't. Now this one I'm reminded of women. Now women, on average, tend to be more agreeable. And if you're a man that's dated at all, you've perhaps experienced a scenario in which a woman has rejected you, but indirectly. They've not just said, no, I don't like you, or I'm not attracted to you, or I don't want to go on a date with you. They're not as direct as that. This can frustrate men because perhaps in their minds, they're asking, well, why didn't she just say that? Why did she have to say, oh, sorry, I'm busy? Or maybe another time. Why couldn't she just be honest with me? I would have accepted that. Well, you might have accepted that, but maybe some other guy would not be so understanding. And can the woman know that beforehand, how you're going to react? If she does reject a man that perhaps is disgruntled by the rejection, then there's a potential danger there that, again, from the man's point of view, maybe doesn't compute because there's a physical advantage you have that you're not recognizing, that is lacking when it comes to women, where there's this physical disparity in terms of strength and size. And so women, whether they know it or not, there's an awareness or a caution when it comes to provoking the aggression of men. In that if they do, well, they're somewhat defenseless relative to the power a man can generate. So this is arguably one reason why women tend to be more agreeable. Perhaps a corollary of that is an indirectness when it comes to communication, particularly when it comes to rejection. Because it is a means of potentially avoiding an unnecessary provocation that could lead to danger. Now, you can certainly make the argument, though, that this strategy is flawed on the part of women, this indirect method, because you could also argue that, well, the indirectness keeps hope alive for some men. If a woman tells a man, well, I'm busy, sorry, can't do it this time, well, the man may accept that literally and try again. And then she has to lie again. And this can build a more sort of long-term frustration in the man that could potentially spill over and boil over into aggression as well. So it's not a foolproof strategy. So it's really a matter of trade-offs. And for some women, they opt for the indirectness and hope that that's the end of it. It isn't always the case, but sometimes it does work. If it didn't ever work, they wouldn't do it. Habits exist for a reason. If you want people to read a book, tell them it is overrated. All the books in my book playlist are overrated, including this one. The characteristic feature of the loser is to bemoan, in general terms, mankind's flaws, biases, contradictions, and irrationality, without exploiting them for fun and profit. This reminds me of one of the first videos on this channel, where I was also referencing Taleb, where he talks about wanting to be right versus wanting to win. And this is sort of similar sentiment here. Yeah, you can be right about all these things that you observe in the world that you don't like, but what does that get you? To be aware of that stuff? Is it just a means of fanning the flames of your own resentment? Or is there a way to take advantage of those, leverage those observations to benefit yourself? So if you're not doing that, then what is the utility of the energy spent ruminating on all of these problems? Do you want to be right or do you want to win?